In the studio, we have our new Labour media and broadcasting spokesperson, Reuben Davidson, joining us. Welcome, Reuben. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we know that you've got a very vast history, especially before coming into Parliament. So before we get into the politics side, we hear that you used to be on What Now for a number of years.
So behind the scenes, very
behind
much.
the scenes, yeah.
So, a few cameo roles, but I produced What Now for about 7 years. So starting as the associate producer, and the role there was to take it out into the community and do live broadcasts from around Aotearoa, which was a great opportunity to have some very early Sunday mornings, but also to spend time in a whole range of communities around the country, bringing people into and onto the show. And I also worked developing and producing content and shows for children and families. So other shows were the 4:30 show, the Adam and Eve show, and Brainbusters was one of the last shows that I created and brought to audiences. So really enjoyable work, and I always really enjoyed working for that audience specifically, and am passionate about making sure that New Zealand children can continue to see local content. I think that's really, really important. And the kaupapa I always had working on those shows was that people, particularly children who were involved in the content that we made, should always leave better off for the experience. And that can be the opposite to some of the other genres of television we see for older audiences, where, particularly in the reality TV space, it's slightly more exploitative or voyeuristic. But for our younger people, for our rangatahi and children, crucial that content and being part of that content celebrates them and makes them feel better, and is an enhancing and positive experience.
I should have mentioned at the top of the show that there's a new element to the portfolio, creative economy. So I apologise for that.
Apology accepted.
So I have a What Now question that one of my kids wanted me to ask. And I don't know if you can actually answer this one, because from what I've heard, it's a little bit of like a state secret. It's really, really quite well protected.
I think I know where you're going.
What's in Gunge?
What's in Gunge is smiles, laughter, fun, and sometimes difficult stains to get out of your clothing. So, but Gunge is a state secret recipe.
Okay.
It's an amazing product, and if you get the recipe wrong, which I did on a number of occasions, it basically becomes a barrel full of water with a lot of solids in it. So I did learn in various loading bays and motel car parks over the years, late on Saturday nights when we were trying to make barrels full of Gunge, you certainly learn exactly how to do it. But I never signed an NDA, but I am honor bound, sworn to secrecy.
That's understandable. I thought that might be the answer. I'm guessing that's also a question you get a lot when people find out that you worked on What Now.
Yeah, it is a common question. The good news is that, and I haven't worked on What Now for a couple of years now, but when I worked there, it wasn't uncommon for us to get requests for a bottle of Gunge, and we always fulfilled them. So if you contact the amazing team who make What Now, I'm sure they'll be forthcoming with a bottle of Gunge posted out for your children or your family to enjoy.
Perfect. Thank you. At least I know what to do now. Yeah, my kids grew up watching What Now. And I grew up watching What Now. It's been on TV for 44 years.
Yeah, it's. I remember when we did the 30th birthday show, and that was a long time ago. So it's in its mid 40s, possibly possibly other than Country Calendar, I think it's the longest running now New Zealand TV show still on air because of fair
That's an
go.
impressive legacy to have,
Yeah, it is.
to be part of that.
Yeah.
How much of that work on a show like What Now, that legacy piece, have you been able to say, this is going to help me with the broadcasting and media portfolio?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. And I think the simplest answer in a word is lots. One of the things that you do when you work on What Now, it's always about working with a really, really good team of people. It's also going out and that's a really important skill in politics as well. And we've got an amazing team of people in our party and in our Labour Party caucus that I'm really enjoying working with. The other thing that we always think at front of mind for us on What Now is that was always first do no harm. And that's also a really good mantra to take into politics and into policy making in particular. I guess the political equivalent of that is the unintended consequences. And often people talk about, great ideas that can have negative impacts for some people or all people. So I think that's definitely something that transfers from creating content on What Now through to political idea, political policy, political legislation in central government.
If we move away from What Now a little bit, how did your transition to politics differ from being in the children's sort of area for television? Because because we've seen a lot of cutbacks with the media, not just in children's media but adult media and all of that. So how concerned are you for the future of our local media?
Yeah, I think even if we look at the last, look what's happened over the last year to 18 months locally in our media sector, I think we all need to be quite concerned about not just the reduction in capacity in our industry, but the speed at which that's happening. And we've seen sort of month after month after month of reductions in the number of particularly broadcast news media reductions with the loss of News Hub, but also with the increasing reduction in the scale of newsrooms at most of our media companies across and organisations across the country, and I think that is a concern. And secondary concern there is the government response to it, because I think we all agree that plurality of media is really important. The fourth estate is really important in all countries. It's really critical that politicians, decision makers, get asked hard questions, get asked to justify the decisions that they're making on all of our behalves. And I don't think we've seen a quick enough response or a responsible response to the current situation in media in New Zealand.
And obviously, you weren't in the media at that time, in the portfolio at the time, because you just got it fairly recently. But what are your thoughts around the handling of the fallout of this from the government? Because we've seen everything from them demoting former Minister Melissa Lee because of reasons that we haven't really found out about, and giving it to Mr. Goldsmith, who, by all accounts, doesn't really have anything to do with media, and they've done that for a number of their portfolios. But anyway, so were you disappointed that Miss Lee couldn't fulfill her obligations, especially with her background as a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the response at the very beginning, when Minister Lee when Minister Lee was the Minister for Broadcasting, the response wasn't empathetic enough. It didn't seem to understand both the human toll that this was going to take, but also the significance of losing that much of our that much of our news storytelling sector in New Zealand. Ultimately, I guess you could characterise it as the minister became the story as opposed to the solution, and I think that was disappointing. The really frustrating thing was that, thanks to the great work that Willie Jackson, as our broadcasting minister prior to the 2023 change of government, there was actually legislation in place that, if moved through swiftly, could have actually helped to stem some of the flow that we're seeing, and could have provided some stronger support for the New Zealand media sector through the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill. And the minister at that stage, Minister Lee, characterised that as wasn't something that she wanted to support. She didn't see that it had value. There was then the change in ministers, and Paul Goldsmith came in as the new Minister for Broadcasting and Media, and promised immediate action, which is a great promise to make, but and certainly something that the media sector wanted to see. It isn't what transpired, and I think that the minister did have good engagement with the sector in those initial weeks and months of becoming the new minister. That was certainly the feedback I got from colleagues in the industry. But the action that followed that wasn't fast enough, in my opinion, and also the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill sat there waiting still, and there was a lot of confusion even from government MPs at select committee level about whether there was support or not support for that piece of legislation. We kept asking questions. Willie, particularly as our broadcasting spokesperson at that point in time, kept pushing to find out whether the government was going to support it, and if not, why not. And there's still, the inaction would suggest that it's not being supported, but I don't believe that they've still, as of yet, clearly given a definitive answer on that, which is really frustrating.
If they do put the legislation on the back burner, will you commit as Labour's spokesperson, if you are not in the government by that point, to put it in the biscuit tin under a revised name?
Yeah, so I have a bill in the biscuit tin currently, which is around a levy for streamers. So this is something that certainly there is a lot of support for in the industry, and that's about making sure that these big international platforms who enjoy large New Zealand audiences but don't have very large New Zealand media content offerings, or in some instances no local content offerings, it adds a levy on them. So basically says, if you enjoy our audience, that's great. You take revenue from that, give us a very small amount of that back, and that can be reinvested into creating local content that could sit on their platforms or could sit on other platforms. But critically, that ensures that local people, local stories, local voices are seen in and by New Zealand and New Zealanders.
So Paul Goldsmith has announced a couple of discussion documents that he wants people to look over in terms of the media industry. He's got some interesting suggestions in there, like making sure that smart TVs have streaming content from New Zealand top front and centre for people to look at, looking at the way that they incentivise filmmaking and production here, runway productions in the region. Is there anything in those discussion documents that jumps out to you as, maybe a really good idea, or something that you think is just not going to work?
I think there are some good ideas in there. I think the discoverability piece is important. So increasingly, we're not watching linear free-to-air content in television. So being and the platforms that we watch our content on become more and more specific and tailored to what we've watched previously. So I think that discoverability piece, making sure that New Zealand platforms, New Zealand content are offered up to New Zealand audiences when we go looking for our next, um, you know, uh, series that we're going to feast on as opposed to binge on, then I think that's really an important piece. One of the things in those sort of 5 ideas that Goldsmith has put in that document, one of the things I think that concerns me about that is it spends a lot of time, certainly in the preamble and throughout the document, suggesting that there isn't any new investment or new allocation of resource into any of these initiatives. And some of them, like the merger between New Zealand On Air and the Film Commission, could be seen as a way to spend less in the sector as opposed to actually investing more or hypothecating revenue sources to be reinvested into the sector.
In terms of the creative industry itself and the creative economy, a lot of that would have a crossover with online content being made by streamers, made by people like us, organizations like The Platform or Reality Check Radio. How do you feel those sort of media pieces fit into the future of media for the country?
Yeah, look, I think one of the great things about the the software, the technology, the things you can, programs you can download and create content with, does allow a diversity of voices in media and in self-generated media content, and I think that's has really exciting potential. There are also risks that come with that because all of a sudden your media content can become quite unregulated and there can be a number of people or potentially a majority of platforms that don't have the level or degree of journalistic integrity or affiliation to regulation that we would need or expect to ensure that people are getting a fair and balanced view of reporting and of media content. So I think it certainly raises some issues around how we support and regulate local media, is, especially because if it becomes just a race to capture eyeballs, then there's a risk that it becomes sensationalist and skewed as opposed to good, fair, balanced media reporting, which is really vital to for all New Zealanders to have access to that, and ultimately, really vital to good democracy that people are getting good balanced media and reporting on local and international current affairs and issues.
The Broadcasting Act is 35 years old now, 35, 36 years old, so a little bit dated. Obviously needs to have a bit of an update. That's the one that sets in place rules around what media is essentially, how you categorize it, what the rules are around broadcasting standards and news authoritativeness and where they get their information and sources from. I believe bans MPs from having direct say in news content within state-owned enterprises. How would you like to see that updated, and how would that bring in things like the creative sector, like gaming, for example? Is there a way of being able to do that, or would it be approaching it as two separate entities that have two separate kind of guidelines and rules that they have to follow?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good question, especially on day 3. And
Sorry.
I'm not going to have I don't have a here's one I prepared earlier, revised, or updated and amended Reuben's version of the Broadcasting Act for your consideration.
Mm-hmm.
I think the clue is in the title, though. There's 2 clues. One's in the age of the current of current act, and the other is in the title, broadcasting, because more and more we see that what the environment that we're sitting in and what we're looking at is not broadcasting as we know it or knew it, and so there's definitely a case for taking a really big look at what the Broadcasting Act or what a Media Act would cover. And similarly, the Copyright Act, particularly with, both of these things were both of these acts were in place prior to, if not the internet, certainly to the internet having as dominant a role as it does now, and also with the rapid and daily changing dynamics around AI. Then there's all sorts of considerations and issues that are well outside of the scope of both of those acts by virtue of their age and vintage. So I think there's definitely some work that needs to happen there, and that needs to be done quite collectively, to ensure that the principles of those acts or new acts, at some point in the future, take into account just how quickly things are shifting and changing.
You bring up AI, which is a really interesting one, because we can see now, ChatGPT has Sora, it creates videos based on comments that you give it, and that seems to be a really big concern for people within the media industry, because there was the writer's strike, for example, last year in the States around having AI write content. Is there a concern that you've come across either in the portfolio that you've had for a few days or in the industry around the impacts of AI on the media industry or the creative economy industry?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of interest is probably the word I would, and a lot of people really invested in how this is going to affect their sector, their industry, their roles and jobs, but also really interested to hear how is government and how is Labor in opposition, what's our approach and what's our take on this. And I could lock myself away in a room and spend 3 weeks writing a policy framework for that. But the speed at which AI is moving would suggest that when I open the door and come out of the dark room with the new policy, AI will have advanced potentially beyond that being relevant or useful. So I think it really comes down to what are the principles with which we want governance around AI, what are the things that we want to protect, what are the opportunities that we want to make available. And one of the initiatives we've taken is to organise, and I've been working with a caucus colleague, Tracy McClellan, on a summit at Parliament around our approach to AI, bringing some of the leading stakeholders into the room and starting a conversation around what are the settings that we need in place, what are the principles that we need, what are the risks, but also what are the opportunities for not just the media sector, but for workforce in general, and for us to make the most of the opportunities that it presents.
I'd love an invite to that.
So would
Yeah.
I. So would I.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
All right, Blake, I'll hand it back over to you, Blake.
As we wind down this interview, it wouldn't be a episode of Behind the Walls without a few disability related questions. So, many of us in the community have had troubling experiences with contacting multiple media outlets of a high and lower grade that allowing us to share our stories. So, what would be your message to the media outlets, whoever they might be, to allow us to share our stories? Because me personally, there has been a large number that have turned me away. So yeah, just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think one of the really important principles there is in any media stories and any media coverage, and this comes back to the experience I had producing What Now for a child audience, is always coming back to the principle of nothing about us without us. So when we created content in the What Now context, we worked with Attitude Pictures to commission a series called Who Cares Steer, and that was the idea behind that was to have children and young people growing up with disability and diversity sharing their lived experience of what that was like and being able to tell their stories from their perspectives. And the idea with that was to take away the stigma or the let's not talk about it approach that some media has, and actually say, let's actually talk about it, let's normalise it, but also let's address the issues of accessibility to content and shows like What Now, so that all children can have the opportunity to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. And finally, how do we keep things like an attitude or like a disability platform going? How do you ensure that it isn't sucked up by this current disestablishing of media within this country?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think that's where things like the Broadcasting Act in its current form, if that's going to shift into a more future-proof and more relevant format, it needs to have some of those same values and considerations that that the current Broadcasting Act has, that New Zealand On Air or funders have. So it's about making sure that, particularly with the disability sector and community, with children, young audiences of children and young people, that they don't become an "and" at the end of a long list of others. That they're actually that content, that legislation as it's developed holds them at the centre of what it's doing and why it's changing, rather than just tacking people on at the end.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Reuben. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program. You're really insightful and really enjoyable, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both for having me, and I'll get on to getting you an invite to our AI forum.
Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.